All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming and welcome. I hope everyone's having a good morning or good afternoon so far, from wherever you're attending from. My name is Ryan Betts. I am a policy specialist here with the National Farm to School Network, and I am joined by several of my other colleagues, and we'll go around and introduce ourselves later on in the webinar. But I am, my pronouns are he, him, and I am based in Mississippi. And I do acknowledge that I live, learn, and work on the ancestral and traditional and contemporary lands of the Choctaw and the Quapaw peoples. So today we're going to be talking more and kind of debriefing from some message testing that we've done. So we'll be kind of talking about how to communicate the benefits of values aligned universal school meals. We'll just kind of a general outline. I'm going to kind of just review more about like the National Farm to School Network, the importance of connecting and communicating farm to school with universal meals policy. We'll kind of review a little bit of the landscape, the policy landscape now, and then we'll kind of take a deep dive and debrief everyone on this narrative and message testing that we've done as a part of our Who's at the Table Schools meal campaign. And then following the debrief, we'll have an opportunity to open it up for any questions that you all might have, and then close out with some updates and some upcoming things, and then we'll wrap up the conversation. So at National Farm to School Network, our mission is to increase access to local food and nutrition education to improve children's health, strengthen family farms, and cultivate vibrant communities. And so really working in that mission, we really envision a nation in which farm to school programs are an essential component of strong and just local and regional food systems, ensuring the health of children, farms, the environment, and the economy and communities. So really, we see farm to school as a triple win. Kids win, farmers win, community wins. Kids who participate in farm to school eat more servings of fruits and vegetables. And then by shortening supply chains from the farm to school, farmers keep a bigger share of the dollar. And communities win when farmers reinvest in their local communities and kids take what they learn home with them. So really, farm to school uniquely sits at this intersection of numerous sectors, and these cross-sectoral benefits include public health, education, economic development, environment, and more. So when we define farm to school, we're really thinking about like the what. So when we say farm to school, we're talking about activities that support the connection communities have with fresh, healthy food and local food producers, and ways to engage children and learning about food and agriculture. So there's really no one defined kind of like program, but collectively farm to school activities empower children and their families to make informed food choices while strengthening the local economy and contributing to vibrant communities. Some core elements of, when we're thinking about farm to school, we are also talking, about farm to early care and education. So all the reasons outlined in the last slide hold true for farm to ECE programs as well. It helps to encourage health and wellness, experiential learning, family and community engagement, and it applies those same core elements. So it's really a great opportunity to engage children really in their most formative years, as well as children and families. So this is also another area which we support as well. So who is National Farm to School? Well, we're more than 20,000 members, nearly 200 partner organizations. We're made up of an advisory board and a national staff. And we're going to be sharing more later on before the end of the webinar about how to join our network. And so as a network, we have several different core functions acting kind of as a hub for connecting people to. So we are a hub for information, connecting people to resources. We're a hub for networking, connecting people to people or other programs or organizations or efforts. across the farm to school journey. And then we're also a hub for advocacy, connecting people to policy. And this has been a growing movement ever since its start. So farm to school kind of roughly got its start in the 90s, mid to late 90s. And ever since the early 2010s and up to now, farm to school just continues to be a growing movement across all 50 states, DC, and US territories. So as we're where we are right now as a farm to school movement, National Farm to Schools call to action states that 100% of communities will hold power in a racially just food system. So when we think about that, we have a vision of a strong and just food system for all, and we seek that deep transformation towards this vision through farm to school. So again, that's the way kids eat, grow, learn about food in schools and early care and education settings. So this is a process that we kind of embarked on 3 years ago through some systems mapping to kind of sketch out that next chapter. So we do acknowledge that the inequities based on race persist, and we will not achieve a racially just food system if we do not dismantle those inequities. So really a part of our call to action is rooted in our values. And I'm going to take a second to kind of stay here on this slide because it directly affects our campaign for values aligned universal school meals. So we believe that farm to school activities built on these 6 shared community values will move us closer to a just, equitable food system that promotes the health of all school children and benefit producers, workers, educators, and their communities. So when we're thinking about economic justice, farm to school and ECE isn't just about food miles. It's about livelihoods of people who grew, harvested, processed, and prepared this food. And we have the chance to build relationships between producers, workers, and consumers in ways that enrich communities and address economic, racial injustices. And with environmental justice, education and the purchasing power of meal programs can shift our food systems away from practices that contribute to climate change and pollute communities of color and towards a more equitable, sustainable use of our soil and water. And for health impact, farm to school and ECE activities go beyond getting kids the calories that they need, but also give them the tools for childhood nourishment and lifelong health. In addition to key nutrients provided by school meals, kids should be empowered with the knowledge and skills to build healthy habits later in life, increase their sovereignty in the food system. School nutrition professionals should receive the equipment, training, and operational support to increase whole ingredient scratch cooking for healthier and tastier meals. Prioritizing racial equity. Progress towards a just food system requires us to address the historic and ongoing structural racism embedded in our food system and to actively promote food sovereignty and racial equity in farm to school and ECE activities. And flowing from that is respecting workers and educators. School nutrition professionals play essential roles in promoting fresh, healthy foods for our kids. The workers who harvest, process, transport, prepare, and serve the vast majority of our nation's food supplies deserve, but always don't currently have that same legal protections as workers in other industries and countries. So policies and practices should respect their rights and value their work appropriately. And finally, animal welfare. Humane treatment of animals in food production is a key part of a respectful, relational, not extractive food system. Inhumane conditions of meat and poultry production are intertwined with the corporate consolidation of our food system and the prioritization of cheaply produced meat at the expense of animal welfare, worker safety, farmer livelihoods, and community health. So in order for all of these values to be actualized, and in order for us to be able to think about how to align them with universal school meals, it's important that the most impacted stakeholders in our communities have a core role in the development and implementation of all farm to school efforts. So as we kind of make this transition into the connection and communicating between values and universal meals policy, let's kind of take a quick second to dive into some additional context, because we want to illustrate just how rapidly universal meals or healthy school meals for all policies are gaining traction in the US. So, much of this was sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic And we've been tracking these policies, over the past several years. And this is what the map looked like in December of 2022. There were three permanent policies. Sorry about that. There were three permanent policies and three temporary policies passed by the end of 2022. But in just the span of a few months, as of April 2023, 5 months later, we can see the enormous potential and interest in these policies. So as of this month, there are 5 permanent policies and 3 temporary policies. And so permanent policies include California, Maine, Colorado, Minnesota, and New Mexico. Excuse me. So overall, there are 30 states and DC that have introduced universal meals policies. So these states collectively represent more than 42 million children, which is over half of the children living in the US today. So the connection between farm to school and universal meals. So we know from our research that there is a strong connection between these policies, between farm to school policies and universal meals policy. We'll be sharing a link to a brief later on in the presentation that we released in December 2022 that kind of speaks to this. And we also know from speaking with advocates and current research that we're working on at NFSN that farm to school and values-based purchasing are integral components of successful campaigns for universal meals. So again, universal meals values, local values-based, we want to convey a key message that connecting universal meals, local food, and values-based purchasing creates a just and local resilient food system. So it's one thing to have universal meals, but they can do even more when they're designed with a focus on equity for and economic impact on each person along the farm to school journey who helps to get that food onto the child's plate. So we really have to think about everyone along the farm to school journey. Because if we want to go beyond and promote an equitable food system, we must ensure that local food served to all students is produced in ways that aligns with all of these values. And so you can kind of see here, this diagram really helps to kind of visualize the overlap between universal meals policies, community values, local food. And you can go deeper into this graphic in the policy brief that we'll share later on. But really, values-aligned universal school meals can transform the food system as we know it. So we need a system of school meals that serves all kids and values the people who get it to the table. And that is why National Farm to School Network and advocates for universal school meals has created this Who's at the Table School Meals campaign. The campaign is here to help provide tools to communicate how our shared community values have the potential to radically transform our food system for the better. And so we've been developing resources to support this values-aligned universal meals advocacy. So the briefing today, or debriefing today, outlines the feedback that we've gotten from our own working group participants, from participants in narrative and messaging research that we've done with some different firms. And I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of just kind of like how that's been structured, but real quick, as we've tested these narratives and messages from NFSN's Who's at the Table campaign, we worked with a communications firm called Flannel and Blade, and they contracted with another kind of research organization called The Next Big Thing. And then we drafted messaging to be tested with our working group, and I'll kind of outline the working group here in a second. But we then did some strategic message testing with a couple different groups. We kind of identified a campaign core narrative that was kind of selected by those groups that were tested. And then we kind of were able to tease out written and visual messaging that was inspired by and corresponded to the narrative and the insights that we discovered. So we really want to thank our working group members. In March last year, they helped to draft an initial narrative and messages to be tested. And so when we worked with Flannel and Blade and the Next Big Thing, they helped us to kind of conduct a co-creation workshop with our working group members and stakeholders, which really represents a variety of backgrounds to identify those shared values and objectives for farm to school meals. And so from this workshop, we were able to design a series of draft campaign core narratives, as well as written and visual messaging, to then be able to test with several different groups. So kind of a little bit of a testing overview. We started kind of drafting the core messages back in March, and then in the subsequent months tested it with 2 core groups. So the first round was with kind of a general audience. So you can kind of think like a lay audience. They might not be familiar with farm to school per se, and kind of the same ways that, folks who are actively engaged with farm to school are. And then the second round was with different farm to school stakeholder audiences. And for both of these groups, we had participants that were between the ages of 19 and 73 from over 30 states, and across a mix of ethnicities and political, social, economic, educational, professional, and cultural backgrounds. So, you think of parents, students, farmers, food producers, and food workers, teachers, principals, school food service staff, other administrators, policymakers. They were kind of more in the second round, whereas it was kind of more like a general audience selection from the first round. And I just wanted to note that they use for this testing, they used a platform called DScout, which is just a general message testing platform, kind of like market research, so on and so forth. There's a little note here just about, for qualitative research of this kind, there is a goal to try to get between 15 and 50 participants for each group. So that way that sample size is good in order to reach kind of data saturation. So with that, would love to kind of talk a little bit about some of the findings. I kind of wanted to start with the areas of broad agreement around the message testing. So one area of broad agreement was supporting small farms, customizing meals to local cultural traditions, and learning about where food comes from. Another was teaching children practical knowledge and life skills through food. Another area of broad agreement was care and inclusivity for students and community members, which invokes warm, positive feelings. People love images of people and bright, high contrast colors that connote a friendly, inviting atmosphere. And then also, where there was an area of broad agreement among the different groups, they saw a need for simple and specific language and actions, which they saw as key. So common vocabulary used by participants included inclusive, welcoming, care, equality, community, small town feel, healthy, and unhealthy. So really through this research that the firm was able to demonstrate was that there's significant agreement among both general audiences and farm to school stakeholder audience when it comes to campaign content for universal kind of farm to school meals, again, that values aligned universal school meals. And so these are kind of some of the core pieces of agreement, which really helps to keep issues of school meals grounded in 3 Ps, personal, positive, and people's first. So values aligned. So when we kind of started testing this, what the research showed was, using the phrase values aligned school lunches, it can carry a huge risk, as people wanted to be sure that they agreed with whatever the values were, and also that values would need to be defined up front and be broadly resonant ones, like community care, in order to move the needle on community-led advocacy in a wide variety of places. So one of the desires with the campaign is to be able to have it be broad enough, but also to be like kind of like open to be like kind of specifically tailored to different groups or folks within different regions or locations throughout the country. So, it's an opportunity that that this campaign messaging can be tailored to specific moments and audiences. And it's also an opportunity where we could ground the narrative in values specific. So like kind of like, where folks were wanting to be sure that they agreed upon whatever the value was, like actually stating the values. So like kids should have food that nourishes them and celebrates their culture, or we should value the workers who are feeding our community's kids every day. So the intrinsic values like that are embedded in this final recommended narrative that kind of that the two groups kind of teased out is this right here. So schools are the best places to spark thinking about how we all live together in communities. Farm to school meals and accompanying activities provide opportunities to understand how the food on our plates affects us, from the well-being that the good nutrition gives our kids to the broader worlds of local economies, chronic disease prevention, climate impacts, and more. Even better, when our kids learn about the hardworking farmers, fishers, and ranchers that feed us, schools become places that help us connect as parents, students, teachers, and neighbors to the land and to one another. So, this combined narrative provides like many opportunities to kind of say, with saying and without saying, the different values that are embedded in, or that could be embedded in a values aligned universal meals policy, being part of nature, health, part of a healthy environment, the value of like knowledge and total well-being in a peaceful world. These are all values that are identified by the original workshop participants as they felt they should be key to farm to school meal narratives and messages. And these values can be used to frame subsequent messaging in order to ensure kind of like an emotional, tonal consistency and to keep messages stitched to that narrative. So to that end, it's worth noting that having a core narrative that focuses on like a systems, like holistic thinking can open up a number of possibilities for dealing how farm to school meals, can be cost effective or can be paid for. Because there was some area of skepticism, and we'll kind of go into this a little bit more around certain aspects of messaging. So having kind of like an opener, more open core narrative can provide an advocacy opportunity in communities, with participatory budgeting processes or other opportunities to try to get involved and influence the conversation. So a lot of people expressed interest in the path that food would take from the farm to the student's plate. So kind of building off of the core narrative, these are kind of like some additional messaging insights and considerations that kind of flow. There was a lot of feedback where folks were wanting to really learn more about all of the folks along the farm to school journey, all of the different hands that have to touch the food that get to the child's plate. And the majority of participants thought it was critical for kids to know where their food comes from. And additionally, when we're talking about local food, it's important to clarify that these would be small local farm providers. So it's the idea of connecting to people's roots and local was very, very appealing to people. So some more messaging insights and considerations. There's a need for like clear, concise messaging that even especially children can understand. So youth were also involved in the initial co-creation workshops with Next Big Thing. And so it was important that as we kind of think about the different campaign assets that we're developing to share once we kind of have all of this messaging and narrative tested and ready to kind of share with the public, that youth was also like a good piece of this. And so there was definitely feedback that messaging needed to be clear, concise, especially for children who could understand and be involved and be a part of the opportunity to shape universal school meal policy. It was also an insight, like, to remember that what might be simple language or messaging to campaign designers, which might be many of us here on the call, that you don't want it to be received as academic, abstract, or overly conceptual, and because it can kind of maybe go over large swaths of the public's head. So kind of, again, just a need to kind of keep messaging concise, simple language. And then where there were areas of skepticism, it's important to directly address that. So, we may have heard in our communities that kids might not want fresh meals, or the cost of school of maybe healthier values aligned school meals are prohibitive, or the impossibility of it actually happening due to like bureaucratic, political, and or other logistical issues. So it's important to kind of keep in the back of your mind and for insights and for considerations to have some sort of language or some sort of response to at least these three kind of core areas of skepticism. Now, one of the things that the research also found was like differences between like a general audience or farm to school stakeholder groups. So it's important to kind of keep in mind these key differences when crafting messages for these different audiences. So the next couple of slides just kind of going to go through some of these different perspectives from the different rounds of testing. So for this one, calling out gross school meals versus highlighting delicious, innovative food. So general audiences found that the videos of gross school lunches entertaining, and no one expressed misgivings about seeing that kind of content, whereas farm to school stakeholders preferred to see the cool new ways food is being used in meals. And in terms of getting back to our roots, connecting with heritage versus being culturally sensitive, general audiences were much more interested in roots and heritage as far as like kind of words that resonated. Farm to school stakeholders did not mention this as much, or when they did, it was more about being culturally sensitive or appropriate. Also, when calling, for skepticism versus hope, general audiences express skepticism around kids not wanting fresh meals, the cost and the impossibility of it actually happening due to bureaucratic, political, and or other logistical issues. So there was definitely some skepticism among the general audience. But for farm to school stakeholders, there was much less skepticism, and that audience was way more hopeful about things changing. So from the testing of the core narratives to different aspects of the messaging, areas of broad agreement, some key messaging insights and considerations, the differences between the stakeholder groups. We then worked with our working group at NFSN to begin developing and drafting some different assets. And so the name for the campaign, Who's at the Table, is built on this messaging advice of inclusivity, positivity, learning more about where food comes from, and recognizing the community who are involved in delivering school meals. And we have carried that through to other graphics and resources. So this includes like different action packs that we have developed for different stakeholder groups. We have them for general audiences and for different stakeholder groups. And then as well as building your own meal game, which is kind of like an interactive tool that we have kind of developed. So this is like just some examples of how National Farm to School Network has kind of begun to translate, learnings from this messaging testing and kind of put it into action to kind of share with with y'all and everyone kind of across the country. But with that, I'm just going to kind of go ahead and stop here. We do have like a quick link to a brief of today's webinar that will be dropping into the chat. And also at this time, I was going to ask my colleagues to just kind of quickly come off camera, so that way we can just introduce ourselves. So that way, as we open it up for questions, we may be, kind of passing the mic, so to speak. So I'll start with introducing, we have Karen Spangler, our policy director here at NFSN. We also have Jiyun, who is our communications manager. We have David, who is our partnerships director. And then we have Miguel, who is one of our co-executive directors. Is there anybody else on here that I am missing? Oh, we have Cassandra, our amazing policy fellow with NFSN as well. So as we open the floor to questions, would feel free to drop your question in the chat. Dave is going to be kind of helping us to kind of manage and read through those. Or if you would like to raise your hand as well, or feel comfortable coming on or off mute, feel free to do that. But we'll go ahead and open up the floor for questions.
Thanks, Ryan. So I see some people have already chatted in some questions. So feel free to continue chatting in some questions for the team to talk through. So the first question, Andrew Jacobson shared earlier. I believe that Ryan may have touched on it already, but wanted to just make sure that we answered it as well. So did you test messaging with youth under the age of 18, those who would be consuming the meals? And Ryan shared this earlier, so if Ryan, you can share a little bit more. But so yes, youth were involved in the initial workshopping with Next Big Thing to make sure that we put together the messaging. In the second stage with D-Scout, I think D-Scout has some age limitation for usage. So in that second stage, the age range was 19 to 73. So there were targets such as parents and other people involved, but in the second stage, there was not under 18 in that stage, but yes to initial message making. Was there anything else that anyone wanted to add to that?
No, I think you
right.
captured that. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to chat that in as well. I just also wanted to address, will these slides be shared? Yes, 100%. They will be shared afterwards. We'll have a follow-up email shortly after this. Bobby writes, can you give us your examples of what you would say to the skeptics around kids not wanting fresh meals or the cost factor?
Yeah, I can go ahead and handle that. Thank you. Definitely always a top question on people's minds. I think that there is certainly a role for considering, whether what kids are going to accept, what they're going to enjoy. I'm a parent myself, so I absolutely understand the difficulty of trying to present something that is going to be a crowd pleaser. So I think that for NFSN, what we know is that meals that incorporate ingredients that kids are interested in, perhaps have had hands-on experience with, have some role in learning about, either through hands-on gardening, that improves their enthusiasm about trying those, about incorporating that ingredient. So in terms of kids not wanting fresh meals, I think definitely we see that when those ingredients are incorporated and they're considered an educational activity or paired educational activities, there's an increase in acceptance. In terms of the cost factor, I think that there's a few different things. I think that we're talking about cost, definitely for sure. There's really unfortunate level of financial pressure on school nutrition professionals to create something that is healthy and appetizing on a very limited budget. So anything that we can do to help provide resources and support in doing that is going to make it more successful. When it's a question of cost in terms of cost of legislation or cost of increasing programs, I think that one of the key aspects or key tenets that we have for NFSN is that we're at the intersection of the farm, the cafeteria, the classroom, and that the benefit of these programs goes outward into the community and forward into the future. And so when you're thinking about the price tag of that, it is greater than just today. So even if your individual kids don't quote unquote need a free universal school meal, they're benefiting from the increase in meal quality. They're benefiting from eating as a community with their peers and seeing other kids try and enjoy different foods. They're seeing that people in their community, in their educational community as a school, are valued. So some of those benefits go beyond that individual, does this kid need it? Is the price tag worth it? Sort of conversation. And so different states, especially in their legislation, have solved or addressed the cost issue in different ways in policy design. So that's a little bit more fine-grained area of policy. For this messaging, we're really staying at that higher level.
Thanks, Karen. And forgive me, my internet is unstable, so I may have missed a few things, but I think that this question has not been answered yet. So what are NFSN's thoughts on pursuing universal meals at the state level versus the national level?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that as well. I think that for the purposes of this campaign, our goal was to try and provide resources to create awareness and conversation wherever the opportunity is, because policy windows, policy trends, they come and go, and we wanted to create something that could help long-term momentum and awareness and support from multiple groups of stakeholders behind these issues, so that whether at the state or national level, values-aligned universal meals policies have a greater chance of success and a greater chance of creating a robust, beneficial policy by involving different stakeholders across the board.
And to add just a little bit to Karen, as she was mentioning, we are looking for the different opportunities. As Ryan said earlier, there's a lot of connection between the universal meals and a lot of these different values-based procurements and other policies involved. And so I think Ryan has a slide later to join our newsletter, because there's a number of different things at the federal level as well that are coming up that we can take action on to help support some of these different things. So wanted to put that plug for that. Awesome. Okay, so I see a comment from Michelle. I worked for a district in South Carolina where we had a farm to school program that was hugely successful. It was a once-a-month program, which was partnered with Green Heart Project to feature one locally grown produce item a month. It was a great way to slowly start to incorporate farm to school. Love that. It's really great to hear a lot of the different organizations, different communities, individuals, and seeing all the different champions to bring together There's so many different ways to bring universal meals, to bring all these different values together. And so seeing examples like that is really awesome. Winnie writes, here in DC, our Universal Free School Meals Amendment Act of 2023, and you include the link, was introduced in January. Hope to have a hearing on the bill in the coming months. Any tips on advocacy to legislators?
I can answer this one, although I will say that, Winnie, I think that you probably know just as much, if not more, than me about advocacy, especially in the DC context, for sure. So don't sell yourself short. So I think that I would say this actually probably depends on the local context, because I think that, for instance, here in DC, it would probably depend on where the budget money would come from and how that would affect other budget items that the city council and mayor would be under pressure for, in terms of, housing or transportation or, job support, education. So I think that probably identifying, what the effects are downstream that can help to support the other outcomes might be helpful. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think also this is one of the reasons that we hope to try and target different groups of stakeholders through our toolkits, so that they're able to hear from parents, they're able to hear from educators, they're able to hear from administrators and from students, rather than just this the same wonderful, impassioned, very dedicated group of child nutrition advocates.
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate that. as you were talking, I was starting to hear the mayor's voice in my head. She dropped her budget on the 22nd of March, and it's doom and gloom here in DC. So for the local budget, but we're still optimistic that we can get this bill passed. So thanks.
Thanks, and we have support in the chat for you, Winnie. And for everyone else, Anne shared another example, demonstrating to legislators that schools have been doing this and have all the tools to keep kids fed. They just need the switch turned back on. Find school nutrition leaders in their district and share a quote with a photo and ask them to testify. Awesome. And then Bobby writes, are there state-based NFSN staff that would be able to testify at hearings around legislation to voice their expertise in this area? We have several this month in Wisconsin, as Meals for All is included in the proposed state budget. I'm just wondering if there are any connections to make our voices heard. Good question. We don't have staff based in Wisconsin, but I know that we have been in communication with a number of different state coalitions on different ways that NFSN, like how we can work together and support. So maybe Bobby, if you want to reach out to us afterwards, we can talk further. Because yeah, we've been talking with different coalitions about things that are happening. So yes. And Nora also writes, I think in response to Winnie, our effort here in Minnesota really focused on the gap between hungry kids and those being served by free and reduced lunch. A lot of legislator pushback was that we already had a program that meets these needs, so trying to combat that. And Cassandra, also thanks for adding in. NFSN will be releasing 4 state case studies later this month that include tips from advocates from successful universal meals campaigns. Yeah, Cassandra's been hard at work.
I can step in. It looks like David
successfully
froze for a
universal
minute.
meals legislation. Oh no, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, I was just reading Cassandra's comment. And Cassandra has been working hard on reaching out to different states who have successfully passed universal meals, such as Vermont. And she is writing case studies with different tips and different advice that states have. And that should be published in the very near future. So keep an eye out for that. Awesome.
One thing I think
all right, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to chat in. We'll give it a second or two before I hand it back to Ryan.
I was just going to say, in response to Nora's comment about the gap, focusing on the gap in Minnesota, I think that one thing that's useful to point out is a lot of people who aren't directly involved in administering school meals programs may have no idea how low the threshold actually is. So that's an important piece that you can share as a point of information with legislators or other people who are not familiar, is the level that is set as the official threshold for free and then for reduced price. I think that people would be extremely surprised. Many people who have not applied for it themselves would be very surprised to know how low it really is, to address that perception that it's already adequate. Yeah.
Thanks, Karen. And Heidi has a question. Feel free to unmute.
Thank you. Thanks all. This has been great and really interesting. I really appreciate the effort that has gone behind coming up with this messaging. So I have a question I've been wanting to ask a group of allies for a while about universal school meals. So I'm a huge supporter of universal school meals and advocate. And yet I also go to school food shows. And going to these food shows sometimes puts into question my firm beliefs around universal school meals, because I see that the money is going to go to the companies that are providing such highly processed packaged foods. And I, for years, have been trying to resolve this inside of me. And I didn't know if others have thoughts or comments. It's hard to find a safe place to be able to bring up such a concern, because I am a strong advocate for school meals, but I'm really confused when I then go to food shows and see everything in packages and highly processed. I'd love some help resolving that if anyone has any ideas or thoughts.
Yeah, I don't mind responding to this if that's okay. So I think that's really why NFSN is part of this conversation. I think a lot of us would agree with the fear that comes with having universal meals just support big ag industry and things like that. So part of the values aligned component is nutritious, is supporting local. And some ways that we're seeing that are states that have farm to school procurement policies that can help bolster this sort of scratch cooking, values aligned, local food component. So you can see that the 5 states that have universal meals policies also have strong farm to school policies. So they have local food incentives and things like that. So there's a strong correlation. And then there's 2 states that have actually included local food provisions in their universal school meals bills. And so that's another sort of way that we can design these policies to not feed into the same system that you mentioned.
Awesome. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Heidi, I want to just quickly add to your comment as a former school food service director and attending many of these conferences over the years. I saw what you've seen, and that is, lots of highly processed foods that are being shown at these conferences to food service directors and so forth. but I just want to say that, that represents a segment of the school food service programs that are involved and are going to these conferences. But I will say that many of those folks, because I've talked to many of them, that are both school food service directors involved in attending conferences and seeing what you're seeing. I mean, it's industry advocating on their behalf regarding the foods that they have and how they can help address, the problems that are being faced by food service directors. In other words, not having enough labor to provide the meals that are being offered. So they're looking at simple and fast and, things that we know are not benefiting students. So all that to say is that even though manufacturers and industry, for the most part, are they're advocating on behalf of their companies. There's also a huge trend, as on this other end, starting with lots of organizations helping these schools figure out how to reduce those products in their schools and introduce more farm to school products. And so we've seen that. I mean, the fact that, one of the slides that Ryan shared, we currently have 62,000 schools now participating in farm to school. So that tells me and should tell everybody that these schools are addressing that specific issue in terms of reducing the amount of highly processed foods, introducing more locally grown foods. And we just have to continue to do our part. And this is the role that the National Farm to School Network plays around the country with many other organizations and members, and trying to continue to impress the need for, as Ryan eloquently talked about, the values aligned and how important those are. So don't be discouraged. It's, I guess, at the end of the line about what you're seeing, because I think that we are seeing significant improvements, but it's this is a long. We're in for the long game, if you will. We're not going to solve this overnight, but we have to continue to push the envelope and do our part. So
thank you, Miguel, and thank you, Cassandra. You both definitely gave me things in my head to think about that I hadn't had. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the really great questions and discussion. We know that this is one of many conversations that we'll be having. And so please stay tuned, and we hope to talk with all of you again in the near future. I'm going to pass it back to Ryan to close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much, David, and everyone for your wonderful questions and conversations. Trying to kind of get back here and share my screen again. But as it kind of came up throughout the conversation, we have a wonderful policy brief drafted by Cassandra and Karen that kind of outlines how universal meals policies, local ingredients, and values-based purchasing can create a just and resilient food system, and we'll be kind of putting that in the chat as well. There's also a really wonderful policy tracking map that NFSN manages and makes sure is up to date with universal meals and values aligned procurement policies that have been introduced through 2023. And as we've said several different times, we have case studies coming soon. So we really we're desirous that this will be something that'll be very valuable to each of y'all. As Miguel was saying, kind of keep on this long journey of helping to cultivate the best school meals that we can have for all students across the country. So with that said, we welcome everyone to reach out and to become a partner organization with National Farm to School Network. Join us in our call to action. You can find more information at farmtoschool.org/our network. And so that way we can kind of keep on keeping on and keeping up the good fight. So with that, thank you all again. This has been a wonderful opportunity to share everything that we've been doing around, values alignment and universal school meals. If we can all agree that giving children the best possible food in school is part of giving them a good start in life, then we really need to work to ensure that the entire system that gets the food to them is just and equitable. So, just as Farm to School is a triple win for kids, farmers, and communities, policies that expand healthy school meals with our shared community values will benefit us all. So we'll be sure to share the presentation, the recording. We also have a brief of today's debrief in a PDF that we will be linking to our website as well. So thank you all again. And with that, y'all have a good rest of your morning and or afternoon. So see y'all. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.